A fearless young man confronts the owner of a restaurant to defend an elderly couple. However, when he encounters them again days later, he is confronted with such a disturbing sight that it leaves him completely paralyzed. Shaken by the scene, he cannot process. Don't miss the exciting conclusion of this story. Watch until the end, subscribe to the channel, and give it a like now to be the first to catch every detail. The sun was shining brightly that afternoon, turning the bustling Central Avenue into a stream of golden light. Martin, at 16, with his backpack slung over one shoulder, walked distractedly. His thoughts were far off, focused on the birthday present he planned to buy for his friend Luna. He wanted something special that would show how much she meant to him. However, his daydreams were interrupted by a loud, angry voice. "I've already told you, if you don't have money, you can't eat here. This isn't a charity," bellowed a burly man in front of the local restaurant. The contempt in his words made everyone around stop and watch the scene, curious and restless. Martin stopped and looked closer. An elderly couple, dressed in simple but clean clothes, was being humiliated in public. The woman, with white hair and tearful eyes, was trying to explain herself while holding her husband's hand tightly, as if that simple gesture could protect them from the manager's harsh words. "Please, sir," the woman begged, her voice trembling. "We brought the money. I swear it must have fallen somewhere. We just need a moment to look for it." The man next to her, who looked even more fragile, was rummaging through his empty pockets with shaking hands. "It might have fallen when we got out of the taxi, Mrs. Beatrice," he whispered, his tone full of concern. Martin, now fully focused on the situation, felt a wave of indignation rise within him. The manager, whose name was Umberto according to his uniform, showed no sign of compassion. His crossed arms and disdainful look only heightened the couple's embarrassment. "And I'll say it one more time," shouted Umberto. "If you can't pay, you shouldn't have even come in here. Get out before I call the police." Martin could no longer contain himself. Something inside him cried out for justice. He knew that despite his youth, he couldn't just stand there watching such cruelty. Without hesitation, he took a few steps forward and positioned himself between the elderly couple and Umberto. "This isn't right," he exclaimed, facing the manager with a firmness he didn't know he possessed. "They are elderly. Clearly, it was an accident. You can't treat them like this." Umberto turned to Martin, his eyes narrowing in a mix of irritation and surprise. "And who are you, boy? Their lawyer?" "Stay out of it where you're not wanted," he retorted, gesturing impatiently. Martin felt his heart race, but he didn't back down. His body was tense, but his voice remained firm. "I'll pay their bill. How much is it?" For a brief moment, Umberto's face softened as he realized the opportunity to resolve the problem without further complications. "It's 50 reis," he said, crossing his arms and watching with a slight smirk as Martin pulled out his wallet. Dona Beatrice, the elderly woman, looked at Martin with tears in her eyes. "My son, you didn't have to. We'll find the money. We just need a little time." Martin gave a slight smile and replied gently, "Don't worry, ma'am. Consider it a gift. Everyone needs help sometimes." He handed the money to Umberto, who quickly pocketed it, clearly satisfied to have the issue resolved without further difficulties. Martin then helped the couple out of the restaurant, feeling the tension of the moment slowly dissipate as they walked down the street. He could feel the curious gazes and whispers of the people around, but he ignored it all, focusing only on the well-being of the two elderly people. "What can I say, young man?" The older man finally broke the silence. "I don't know how to thank you. That was an act of great kindness." Martin shook his head, embarrassed by the praise. "I didn't do anything special, just what anyone should do." Dona Beatrice squeezed his hand tightly. "You did far more than you realize, dear. May God bless you." As they said their goodbyes, Martin felt a mix of relief and concern. He knew he had done the right thing, But he also knew that the money had been saved for Luna's gift. As he walked away from the couple and continued down the avenue, the reality began to weigh on his shoulders. He still had to face his friend's birthday, and now with no gift. When he got home, he threw his backpack on the couch and stood still for a moment, staring into space. His mother, Marta, was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The familiar smell of spices filled the air, but it didn't calm the knot forming in Martin's stomach. He took a deep breath and went to his room, sitting on the edge of the bed. On the table beside him, the envelope with the money he had saved for weeks was no longer there. "I did the right thing," he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself. But the anxiety of facing Luna the next day grew stronger. They had been friends since childhood, and he knew she had been excitedly planning her birthday. The gift he intended to give symbolized how much he cared, and now he had nothing. That night, Martin didn't sleep well. He tossed and turned in bed, imagining Luna's possible reactions. Would she understand? Should he have acted differently? The hours passed slowly, and the sounds of the night enveloped his restless thoughts. The next morning, the sun rose with almost cruel intensity, illuminating every corner of the city. It was Luna's birthday, and Martin walked toward her house, feeling a growing pressure in his chest. The air felt heavier, and his hands were sweating. Every step seemed to bring him closer to a confrontation he wasn't ready to face. When he reached Luna's house, the party had already started. The sound of laughter and music filled the air, and colorful balloons decorated the yard. The vibrant colors and cheerful atmosphere sharply contrasted with the weight Martin carried inside. He took a deep breath, trying to prepare for what was to come. As he entered the party, his eyes immediately searched for Luna. She was in the center of everything, as always, surrounded by friends and radiating joy. She wore a yellow dress that beautifully contrasted with her dark hair, and her laugh was loud, full of life. When her eyes met Martin's, she smiled, but something in her expression quickly changed when she noticed he wasn't holding anything in his hands. "Martin, you came?" Luna exclaimed, walking toward him with a smile on her face. But as she got closer, her smile began to fade. "Where's my present?" she asked playfully, but with a hint of curiosity. Martin felt the knot in his throat tighten. He knew this moment was coming, but even so, he wasn't ready. "Luna, I need to talk to you. Can we go somewhere more private?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Luna frowned, a bit confused, but nodded. They walked to the back of the garden, where the sounds of the party seemed distant. A light breeze blew, rustling the leaves, but nothing eased the tension hanging in the air. "Martin, what happened?" Luna asked, now clearly concerned. "Why are you acting so strange?" He swallowed hard, trying to organize the words in his mind. "Luna, I couldn't buy your present," he began, feeling the weight of disappointment in his own voice. "Yesterday, before I could finish," Luna interrupted, her eyes widening in surprise and displeasure. "What do you mean you didn't buy it, Martin? You knew how important this day was to me." I know, he responded quickly, trying to explain. "But yesterday, I saw an elderly couple being humiliated at the restaurant. They couldn't pay, and I felt I had to help them. I spent the money I had saved for your present." Luna stared at him in silence for a moment, her expression shifting quickly from surprise to a mix of disbelief and irritation. "So, you used my present money to pay the bill for two strangers?" she asked, crossing her arms, clearly upset. Martin nodded. "Yes, Luna. I did what I thought was right in that moment. I couldn't just ignore what was happening." Luna's expression hardened. "Martin, I get being kind and helping others, but this was my birthday. I was counting on you. Didn't you think about how this would make me feel?" she said, her voice now laden with frustration. He tried to respond, but each word from Luna felt like a blow. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone," she continued, her voice growing louder. I can't be with someone who puts other people's problems ahead of mine." Those words hit Martin like a knife. He felt the weight of Luna's judgment, and for a moment, everything he had done seemed in vain. "Luna, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice faltering. I thought I was doing the right thing." She shook her head, clearly disappointed. "I think it's best if we end this here," Luna said before turning away and walking back to the party, leaving Martin alone with the weight of his choice. The walk home after Luna's party was a lonely one. Martin, with his head down and shoulders slumped, felt as though he was carrying the weight of the world on his back. Luna's words still echoed in his mind, harsh and unforgiving. "I can't be with someone who puts other people's problems ahead of mine." He couldn't believe how quickly and painfully everything had unfolded. Years of friendship with Luna seemed to have been destroyed in a single afternoon, all because he chose to help an elderly couple. His mind raced, questioning whether he had made the right decision. Should he have ignored what he saw at the restaurant? Was there some way he could have done both? Help the elderly and keep Luna happy? When he arrived home, he found his mother, Marta, sitting at the table, flipping through a magazine. She looked up at Martin as soon as he walked in, and her expression changed instantly when she saw the state he was in. "Martin, what happened?" she asked, concerned. "You look so down." He let out a long sigh and sat down next to her. "The party was a disaster," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. Marta set the magazine aside and leaned in closer to him, her eyes full of tenderness and concern. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Martin hesitated for a moment. It wasn't easy to explain the whirlwind of emotions he was feeling. "I did something I thought was right, Mom. At the restaurant that day, I paid the bill for an elderly couple who were being humiliated. I used the money I had saved for Luna's birthday present." Marta frowned, surprised but also proud. "That was very noble of you, Martin. You followed your heart and did the right thing." "I thought so," he said, running a hand through his hair, restless. But Luna didn't see it that way. She was really upset. She said I put her second and embarrassed her in front of her friends. Marta watched him closely, seeing how much it was affecting him. "And what did you say to her?" "I tried to explain, but she didn't want to listen. To her, I should have thought about her first. She ended everything. Our friendship, you know," Martin replied, feeling the knot in his throat tighten even more. "I think I disappointed her in a way that can't be fixed." Marta took his hand and squeezed it gently, offering silent comfort. "Martin, it's hard to please everyone all the time. What you did was an act of kindness. You saw someone in need and acted. That's a rare and precious quality. If Luna can't see the value in that, maybe she needs time to understand what truly matters." He remained silent for a moment, absorbing his mother's words. "But what if she never understands? I lost one of my best friends because of a choice." Marta sighed softly, brushing Martin's hair gently. "True friendships go through ups and downs, my son. Sometimes what we need is distance to reflect. But the most important thing is that you stayed true to who you are. Not everyone will understand that right away." Martin nodded, but the feeling of guilt still lingered. He remembered the expression on Luna's face, her disappointment and resentment. He knew how much that birthday meant to her, and he had failed to deliver what she expected. Yet at the same time, he couldn't have acted differently. The elderly couple needed him. Deep down, he knew his decision was the most just. That night, Martin tossed and turned in bed, unable to find peace. The image of Luna's anger and the sharp words she spoke remained etched in his mind. But mixed with that was also the memory of the elderly couple's relieved, grateful faces. The duality of the situation kept him awake, questioning himself, others, and the choices he had made. When the sun finally rose, he woke up drained, still weighed down by the emotions of the previous day. At school, the distance between him and Luna was palpable. They avoided each other in the hallways, and what once was a strong friendship now felt like an insurmountable chasm. However, as days passed, Martin began to reflect more deeply on his actions. He wondered if the value of a physical gift truly outweighed the value of an act of compassion. He questioned whether Luna, deep down, would ever be able to see what he saw in that moment of need. But he also knew he couldn't force her to understand. People have different perspectives, and sometimes the only thing you can do is follow your own path. Days turned into weeks, and the wound of losing Luna was still fresh. But gradually, Martin began to accept that he had done what he believed was right. He stood firm in his values, and that was something he could be proud of, even if the cost had been high. The walk home felt longer and more painful than ever. Martin walked slowly, replaying every word Luna had said in his mind. "I can't be with someone who puts other people's problems ahead of mine." Those words echoed in his head like a sentence. He knew he had done what he thought was right, but that didn't ease the sting of rejection. When he got home, he found his mother, Marta, sitting at the kitchen table, going over some bills. She noticed the defeated look on her son's face and gently asked, "How was the party, Martin? You look a bit down." He let out a sigh, sitting down at the table with his head lowered. "It didn't go as I expected, Mom. I think I messed everything up." Marta set the papers aside, giving her full attention to her son. "What happened? Do you want to talk about it?" Martin looked at the table, trying to find the right words to explain the whirlwind of emotions he was feeling. "Yesterday, I used the money I had saved for Luna's present to help an elderly couple. They were being mistreated at the restaurant because they couldn't pay the bill. I felt like I had to do something, so I paid for them." Marta smiled, proud of her son's gesture, but she sensed there was more to the story. "That was very noble of you, Martin. But it seems Luna wasn't happy about it, was she?" Martin shook his head, his eyes full of guilt. "She got really upset. She said I didn't care about her, that I embarrassed her in front of her friends. I don't think she'll ever understand why I did what I did." Marta placed her hand on Martin's, offering the silent comfort of a mother who always knew what to say. "You followed your heart, my son. Sometimes people can't see beyond their own expectations. But that doesn't mean what you did was wrong. It just means Luna needs time to understand. And maybe she never will. And that's part of life too." Martin sighed, taking in his mother's words. He knew what he had done was driven by compassion, but he couldn't shake the feeling that everything around him was falling apart. "But what if I lose her friendship forever? What if I ruined everything?" Marta squeezed his hand firmly. "You can't control how others react, Martin. All you can do is stay true to who you are. And from what I see, you're a good person who cares about others. And if Luna can't see that, maybe the problem isn't yours." That night, as Martin tried to sleep, his mother's words echoed in his mind. There was a pain he couldn't avoid, a sadness from disappointing someone he loved. But at the same time, there was also a quiet pride, the pride of knowing he had done the right thing, even if it cost him something precious. In the days that followed, Martin tried to distract himself with everyday tasks, but the fight with Luna felt like a constant weight on his heart. He saw her every day at school, but they no longer spoke like before. There was an awkward silence between them, and each time their eyes met, Martin felt his heart tighten. One afternoon, with no particular destination in mind, Martin decided to walk through the city. He needed time to think, to reflect on what to do next. It was then, as he wandered through the streets, that something familiar caught his attention. The sound of cans and bottles being sorted on the sidewalk. Looking toward the noise, he saw the elderly couple he had helped days before. One and Beatrice, standing next to a wheelbarrow, collecting cans and bottles for recycling. They seemed focused on their work, their hands trembling but steady in their purpose. Martin paused for a moment. Watching them, he felt a pang in his chest. These people, whom he had helped on impulse, were now here, living a harsh reality he could never have imagined. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Mr. and Mrs. Beatrice," he called softly, his voice gentle to avoid surprising them. Beatrice was the first to look up, and when she recognized him, a warm smile lit up her face. "Martin, how wonderful to see you, my boy," she said, walking toward him and giving him a heartfelt hug. When also approached, wiping his hands with an old pocket handkerchief. "My boy, you were an angel that day at the restaurant. I don't know how to thank you." Martin smiled, but something was bothering him. "I should be thanking you for letting me help. But why are you doing this?" he asked, glancing at the cart full of recyclables. Beatrice and Anwen exchanged a meaningful look before responding. Beatrice let out a deep sigh. "We're trying to save up some money. Things have been a little tough lately, but we manage." Martin's heart tightened. Seeing these two so dignified and grateful having to struggle for something so basic deeply moved him. "Can I help you with this?" he asked, feeling the need to do more. They hesitated for a moment, but the kindness in Martin's eyes convinced them. "Of course, my boy," Anwen said with a grateful smile. While they were gathering recyclables together, Beatrice and Anwen shared stories from their lives. Memories of good times and hardships they had overcome. The connection Martin felt with them was deeper than he could have imagined, and little by little, the pain he felt because of Luna began to fade. He found a kind of comfort in the simple work and in the sincere conversations with the couple. By the time they finished, the sky had begun to take on shades of orange and purple with the setting sun. Martin said goodbye to Anwen and Beatrice, promising to visit them again. As he walked home, he felt a little lighter, as if the connection he had formed with the couple was helping to heal the wounds Luna had left behind. He didn't know it yet, but that small act of kindness would transform his life in ways he could never have predicted. The days that followed were marked by a renewed sense of purpose for Martin. He continued visiting Anwen and Beatrice regularly, helping them with small tasks and listening to the stories of their lives. The friendship that was forming between them surprised him, but also strengthened him in ways he hadn't expected. The conversations, the simple gestures, and the gratitude they showed were a balm for Martin's wounded heart. One afternoon, after collecting more recyclables, they sat down in a small park to rest. Beatrice, with trembling hands, offered Martin a sandwich she had brought from home. Anwen, meanwhile, gazed pensively into the distance. "Martin," Beatrice began, breaking the silence, "you've been a great help to us, not just for what you did at the restaurant, but for being here with us. I feel it's time to tell you something important about our story." Martin frowned, surprised by the seriousness in her voice. He realized there was something the couple had been holding back, something deeper than he could have imagined. Anwen cleared his throat, as if preparing the right words for a revelation that wouldn't be easy. "The truth is, my boy, we're not exactly in the situation we appear to be." Martin looked from one to the other, confused. "What do you mean?" Beatrice sighed, casting a loving glance at Anwen before continuing. "We're not as poor as we seem. In fact, we have more than enough to live comfortably." Martin was stunned. He looked at the cart full of recyclables beside them, at the worn clothes they wore, and he couldn't understand. "Then why are you doing this? Why are you living like this?" Anwen leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Martin's. "We're here by choice. We wanted to understand what it really means to live with little, to feel firsthand what so many people go through every day. It's a sort of experiment, if you can call it that." Beatrice nodded. "We spent most of our lives comfortably, but in recent years, we felt we needed to reconnect with what really matters. So, we decided to leave behind our life of luxuries and live like ordinary people. It's given us a lot of clarity about who we are and the world around us." Martin was still processing the information, his mind swirling with questions. But why? Why choose something so difficult when you didn't have to? Anwen gave a slight smile. "We wanted to find someone who understood the value of small things, someone with a true heart. That's how we met you, Martin." When you helped us at the restaurant without expecting anything in return, we saw something rare in you. We saw a genuine kindness, and that's why we decided to share our story with you." Martin remained silent, the weight of the revelation washing over him like a wave. He had thought he was helping a vulnerable couple, but in reality, they had chosen him for something greater. He felt strange, almost as if he had been tested without knowing it. But at the same time, there was a sense of honor in being seen so deeply. I don't know what to say," Martin confessed, still trying to grasp what all of it meant. "You don't have to say anything right now," Beatrice responded with a gentle smile. "But we want to offer you something." One pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to Martin. "Inside, you'll find a proposal, something we believe can change your life, just as you changed ours that day." Martin looked at the envelope, unsure of what to expect. His fingers hesitated before opening it, but he finally did. Inside, there was a formal letter offering him the opportunity to work with One and Beatrice in a charity organization they funded. The offer included not only a salary, but also the chance to lead projects that could impact thousands of people in need. "We want you to be part of our mission," One explained. "You have a heart that cares for others, Martin, and we want to help channel that into something bigger." For a few moments, Martin was speechless, absorbing the offer. It was an opportunity he could have never imagined, a chance to transform the kindness he always carried within him into something that could make a difference on a large scale. I don't know how to thank you," he finally said, finding his voice. "I never expected something like this. I never imagined that you were who you are." Beatrice laughed softly. "Sometimes, people aren't what they seem. And in the same way, life sometimes surprises us with opportunities we never imagined. The important thing is what we do with those opportunities." When placed a hand on Martin's shoulder, his eyes filled with expectation and hope. "The decision is yours, my boy. But we know that if you accept, you'll be able to do something extraordinary." Martin looked at the couple in front of him, feeling a mix of gratitude, surprise, and a new determination growing inside him. The opportunity One and Beatrice were offering wasn't just a job. It was a calling to something greater, a chance to use his kindness and compassion to change the lives of others, just as theirs had been transformed. With a shy but determined smile, he said, "I accept." In the days following One and Beatrice's revelation, Martin's life changed in ways he could have never predicted. He had accepted the offer to work at the charity funded by the couple, but he still didn't fully grasp the impact this decision would have on his life. The letter he received wasn't just a job offer. It was an invitation to be part of something bigger, something that could change the world for many people. On that sunny morning, Martin prepared for his first day of work. He was nervous, but also so excited. Marta, his mother, watched him as he got ready, noticing the difference in her son's behavior. He seemed more determined, more focused. She didn't know exactly what was happening, but she knew Martin was about to embark on a new phase in his life. "You look different today," Marta commented as she served breakfast. "What's going on?" Martin smiled shyly, looking at his mother with affection. "I got a job offer, Mom. A job that can really make a difference for a lot of people." Marta looked at him with a mixture of pride and surprise. "What kind of job?" Martin hesitated for a moment, thinking about how to explain the magnitude of the opportunity he had received. "I'm going to work with a couple, One and Beatrice, whom I recently met. They have a charity organization, and they asked me to help lead some of their projects." Marta's eyes widened in surprise. "Leading projects, Martin? That's amazing. How did you meet these people?" Martin sighed, recalling the long path that had brought him to this moment. "Do you remember that elderly couple I helped at the restaurant? It's them. But what I didn't know is that they have a very different life than they appear. They have resources and dedicate their lives to helping others. And now, somehow, I'm part of that." Marta smiled, visibly moved. I always knew you had a good heart, Martin. You deserve this chance. Martin nodded, but deep down, he was still struggling to understand how this opportunity had come so suddenly. However, he knew he couldn't let fear or uncertainty stop him from making the most of this new chapter. That day, he went to the organization's office, a simple yet welcoming building located in the heart of the city. When he walked in, he was greeted by a small but dedicated team. Warm smiles and friendly greetings came from all sides. Juan and Beatrice were waiting for him in a meeting room, seated at a table surrounded by documents and spreadsheets. "Martin, it's a pleasure to have you here," Juan said, standing up to shake his hand. "We have high hopes for you." Beatrice smiled, gesturing for him to sit down. "We know you're just starting, but we're confident you'll do great." Martin felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had always wanted to make a difference, but he had never imagined he'd have the chance to lead something this big. "I'll do my best," he replied humbly, taking a seat and glancing at the papers before him. "Let's start with something simple," Juan said, opening one of the files on the table. "We want you to help us create a new project to provide food and shelter for struggling families in this region. We have the resources, but we need someone who knows the area, someone with local insight." Martin looked at the documents. There were maps of the city, lists of potential partners, and various data on the situation of vulnerable families in the area. He realized this wouldn't be easy, but at the same time, he felt inspired by the trust Juan and Beatrice had in him. "I know some of the areas where help is most needed," Martin said, looking at the map. "There are places on the outskirts where families live in very poor conditions. We can start there." Beatrice nodded, taking notes on what he said. "Exactly the kind of information we need. We want you to get directly involved with these communities, find out what they need, and come up with creative solutions." Martin spent the rest of the day immersed in planning. He realized that working with Juan and Beatrice was not only an opportunity to learn, but also a chance to put his ideas and passions into practice. During the afternoon, he had meetings with other team members, sharing his ideas and hearing suggestions on how to implement the project. At the end of the day, Juan approached him with a satisfied smile. "You're doing great, Martin. We knew we were right to choose you." Martin smiled, though he still felt a little overwhelmed. "It's a lot of responsibility, but I'm ready to do whatever it takes." Juan placed a hand on Martin's shoulder. "You've got what it takes, son. And remember, you're not alone in this. We're all here to help." As Martin left the office that night, he felt a new sense of purpose. He knew what he was doing was more than just a job. It was a chance to change lives. As he walked home, his thoughts briefly drifted to Luna. He wondered if she would understand the path he had chosen. But at that moment, he realized that even if she didn't, he was exactly where he needed to be. The days following his start at the organization were challenging, but deeply rewarding for Martin. He threw himself into the new project, determined to make a difference in the city's underprivileged communities. Each morning, he woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that the work he was doing would directly impact many lives. Martin soon realized there was much more to be done than he had initially thought. The project Juan and Beatrice had assigned him was far from simple. It involved coordinating with several local NGOs, securing financial resources, and developing a logistical plan to distribute food and shelter to families in need. But with each new challenge, Martin grew more confident in his abilities. One morning, he walked into the office and headed straight to a meeting with Juan and other members of the planning team. The room was filled with city maps, lists of partner organizations, and budget proposals. As he entered, all eyes turned to him, not with expectation, but with confidence, something he was still getting used to. "Martin, we'd like to hear your ideas for the next phase of the project," Juan said, motioning for him to speak. "You've spent a lot of time in the field, and we know no one understands the needs of these communities better than you." Martin took a deep breath and began to explain his plan. "Well, After visiting several areas, especially in the outskirts, it became clear that many of these families don't just need food and shelter. They also need medical assistance and psychological support. They're suffering in ways that go beyond what we can solve with just basic supplies. Beatrice, who had been watching closely, nodded in agreement. That makes sense. We've seen in other places that the emotional impact of these conditions is devastating. Exactly, Martin continued. That's why I'd like to propose that we expand the scope of the project. In addition to providing food and shelter, we could partner with health clinics and volunteer psychologists to offer support to these families. This way, we could address their immediate needs and also provide more long-term help. The silence that followed was filled with approving looks. When smiled, clearly impressed. You have a clear vision, Martin. I think this is exactly what we need. I agree, Beatrice said. Let's explore the possibilities of partnering with clinics and healthcare professionals in the area. You've done a great job identifying this need. Martin felt excited and proud. The sense of doing something meaningful filled him in a way he had never experienced before. In the days that followed, he dedicated himself even more to the project, visiting new areas, talking to families, and reaching out to potential partners for the new focus on health and well-being. One day, while walking through one of the areas he had identified as a priority, Martin was approached by a middle-aged woman. Her face was marked by fatigue, and she was carrying a shopping bag. She stopped when she saw him. "You're the young man helping our community, aren't you?" she asked with a tired but sincere smile. Martin nodded, surprised to be recognized. "Yes, I'm working with a charity organization to bring aid to this area." The woman's eyes filled with gratitude. "I just wanted to say thank you. I have 3 small children, and the support you're bringing has made a huge difference for us. For the first time in months, I feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel." Martin was touched. He knew the work he was doing had value, but hearing it directly from someone being impacted made everything feel more real. "I'm really glad to hear that," he said with a genuine smile. "We're here to help, and I promise we'll keep doing everything we can to improve the living conditions for everyone." The woman nodded, and before leaving, she placed her hand on Martin's arm. "You're a blessing to all of us, young man. God bless you." Those words stayed with Martin throughout the day. When he returned to the office that afternoon, he shared with the team what he had heard and how the families were being directly impacted by their work. The enthusiasm in the room was palpable. Everyone felt they were doing something that transcended ordinary work. As the weeks went by, Martin's ideas began to take shape. He secured partnerships with local health clinics and volunteers willing to provide free psychological support to the families, along with the distribution of food and shelter. The team implemented health and wellness programs, offering medical checkups and counseling sessions within the communities themselves. The project, now much larger than originally planned, began to attract attention from the local media. Newspapers and television stations wanted to know more about the young man who was leading such a significant change in the city. One and Beatrice were thrilled with the recognition and couldn't have been prouder of Martin. One afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting, one called Martin for a quick chat at his office. "Martin, Beatrice, and I have been talking a lot about the work you've been doing," one said, a satisfied smile on his face. "And we think it's time to give you even more responsibility." Martin frowned, curious. "What do you mean?" "We want you to take the lead on a new project. Something even bigger," one replied, his eyes shining with excitement. "We're planning to expand our reach to other cities, and we want you to be responsible for that expansion." Martin was speechless. The offer was huge, something he never could have imagined when he first started. I don't know what to say. It's a big responsibility." "We know you're capable," Beatrice said, walking into the office with a smile. "You've already proven you have the vision, compassion, and skill to lead. We have full confidence in you." Martin smiled, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. He knew he was ready for the next step. This was the moment to grow even more and accept the challenge being offered to him. "I accept the challenge," he said, his voice firm and determined. Martin was at the peak of his journey, deeply involved in the expansion of the charity organization to other cities. Everything seemed to be flowing perfectly. He worked tirelessly, organizing meetings with new NGOs, visiting communities, and forming partnerships with companies eager to support the cause. Each step forward was progress, and the sense of accomplishment accompanied him every day. But like every journey, not everything stays steady forever. It was an autumn morning, the air already growing cooler, and the leaves falling from the trees, painting the streets orange and gold. Martin walked into the office with a smile on his face, excited to present the new progress reports for the project's expansion. Wynne and Beatrice had been especially proud of what he had achieved so far. However, as soon as he entered the room, Martin immediately sensed that something was wrong. The unusual silence hanging over the office unsettled him. Mornings usually began with lively conversations and laughter, but that day, there was a strange stillness in the air. He found Beatrice sitting at the table, her face serious, her head bowed, and her eyes fixed on a distant point, as if trying to cope with something difficult. "Beatrice," he called out, concerned, "is everything okay?" She looked up, and Martin could see the tears forming in her eyes. Beatrice sighed deeply before speaking, her voice trembling. "Martin, we have some difficult news." Martin's heart began to race, and he slowly sat down at the table. "What happened?" Beatrice took a deep breath, trying to find the strength to continue. "Wynne suffered a heart attack this morning. He was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't make it." The news hit Martin like a crushing wave. He couldn't process the words. Wynne, the man who had believed in him, who had been more than just a mentor, almost like a father on his new journey, was gone. The room seemed to spin, and he could barely hear what Beatrice said after that. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, wiping away a tear. "He passed so suddenly." Martin sat in silence, feeling the weight of the moment settle on him. Everything he had built, all the conversations and plans he had made with Wynne for the future, now felt empty. He remembered the encouraging words Wynne had given him, the trust he had placed in him from the beginning. Now, that voice, that presence that had been a rock in his life, no longer existed. After a long moment of silence, Martin finally murmured, I don't know what to say. He was all of this. This whole mission, it was him. How do we move forward without him?" Beatrice placed a hand on Martin's arm, her expression serious but filled with compassion. "Martin, you and I both know that Wynne believed deeply in what we were doing, and he believed even more in you. He saw in you someone capable of continuing his legacy, of carrying the torch and leading the way. It won't be easy, I know, but he believed in you in a way you didn't even realize." Beatrice's words sank deep into Martin's mind, but he still felt a tight knot in his throat, as if the loss was too great to bear. However, he knew there was truth in what Beatrice was saying. One had always been preparing him for this moment, even though Martin had never realized that the transition could be so abrupt. In the days that followed, Wynne's loss was deeply felt throughout the organization. The funeral was simple, but filled with love. People from all over the city and other regions where the organization had worked came to pay their respects. Men, women, and even children who had been helped by Wynne and Beatrice's charity shared heartfelt stories about the impact he had had on their lives. Each story recounted a lesson of kindness and generosity that Wynne had sown throughout his life. Martin remained silent for most of the funeral, trying to process the magnitude of the loss and the meaning Wynne had left behind. Sitting next to Beatrice, he felt the weight of responsibility now doubling on his shoulders. He knew there was no turning back. Wynne's legacy was now his to carry. After the ceremony, Beatrice pulled Martin aside for a private conversation. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a renewed firmness in her voice. "Martin, I know this is hard for you. It's hard for me too. But what we did together, what went started, can't stop here. We need to keep going, and I know he wanted you to lead this new phase." Still grieving, Martin looked at her, trying to grasp the weight of what was being asked. I don't know if I'm ready, Beatrice. One was always the foundation of everything. I just followed what he built." Beatrice held his hands, squeezing them tightly. "But he saw something in you, Martin. You have the vision, the passion, and the heart to continue. He always knew that when the time came, you would be ready. And now, that time has come." Martin knew he couldn't refuse. Even though the grief was still fresh, even though the pain of loss was nearly unbearable, he also knew he couldn't let one down. He had been prepared for this moment, even if unconsciously, and now it was his turn to honor the legacy of his mentor and to ensure that the organization continued to impact many more lives. The next day, with his eyes still swollen from crying, Martin returned to the office. There was much to be done, many decisions to be made. He knew that the future of the organization depended on his leadership, and though the void left by one was impossible to fill, Martin committed himself to continuing the work they had started together. The days following Wen's death were challenging for Martin. The absence of his mentor and friend was felt in every decision he made, in every meeting he led. The office, once so full of Wen's charismatic presence, now felt emptier and quieter. But at the same time, there was an emerging strength within Martin, a quiet determination to honor the legacy that had been entrusted to him. Beatrice, though still grieving, stood by Martin every step of the way. She had decided that she would continue to support the organization, but she would leave the larger responsibilities in Martin's hands. He now had the task of leading not only the expansion project, but also the organization itself into its new chapter. And this would demand more from Martin than he had ever imagined. On one of the rainy mornings that marked the beginning of winter, Martin arrived at the office earlier than usual. He knew something needed to change. While the work they were doing was impactful, Martin felt it was time to bring a new vision, a new approach to the organization. He needed to shape the future of the institution in a way that not only continued Wen's legacy, but also brought fresh energy to what they were building. Sitting at his desk, surrounded by reports and documents, he began sketching out his ideas. He knew that expanding to other cities was crucial, but there was something deeper that bothered him. The world was changing, and he needed to ensure that the organization was adaptable, innovative, and capable of addressing new social demands. Later that morning, Martin called a meeting with the entire team. People were still recovering from Wen's loss, but they also felt the need to move forward. Martin's expression was serious, but there was a spark in his eyes that no one had seen before. "I know this has been a difficult time for all of us," he began, looking at each person around the table. "Wen was the heart of this organization, and there's no way to replace his presence. But he believed in something bigger. He believed in the power of change, and it's our duty to make sure that vision continues." The faces in the room were attentive, all clearly moved by Martin's words. He knew he needed more than just a motivational speech. He needed action. "We have a unique opportunity ahead of us," Martin continued, with growing confidence in his voice. "The expansion to other cities is already underway, but I want us to think about how we can be more than just a charity organization. I want us to become a model for social transformation. I want us to think about ways to not only provide emergency aid, but to empower communities with education, professional training, and entrepreneurship opportunities." There was a murmur of surprise in the room. This was a more ambitious vision than anyone had expected, but Martin was ready to lead the way. "Our goal should not only be to alleviate immediate suffering, he said as his eyes scanned the faces in the room. We must empower people to lift themselves out of poverty and build a better future on their own. This means investing in education, training programs, and partnerships with local businesses that can create jobs and growth opportunities. Beatrice, sitting next to Martin, watched with a subtle smile. She could clearly see the impact one had left on him, but she also noticed something new. Martin was creating his own vision, shaping the organization for the future with a unique approach. But to do this, Martin continued, we need to restructure. We need to create departments focused on education, training, and economic development. And we need a team that's willing to go the extra mile to innovate. The enthusiasm in the room began to build. The team, who had previously been worried about the future without one, now saw a new path, a new hope. In the following weeks, Martin began implementing the changes he had proposed. He established new partnerships with local universities to provide scholarships and training programs for vulnerable youth. At the same time, he started working with regional businesses to create internship and employment opportunities for the communities the organization served. Results began to show quickly. The first group of young people benefiting from the professional training program started to stand out, some of them securing stable jobs and even opening small businesses. Martin saw firsthand how these transformations not only impacted individual families, but also strengthened communities as a whole. Poverty was being fought with concrete tools of growth and independence. On one occasion, while visiting one of the new communities served by the organization, Martin was approached by a young man who had benefited from the training program. He was tall, with a broad smile and vibrant energy. Martin, the young man called out, visibly emotional. I just wanted to thank you. The electronics course I took thanks to the organization's program changed my life. Today, I'm employed at a local company and can support my family. Moved, Martin shook the young man's hand, feeling the connection between that moment and everything one had dreamed of for the organization. You are the proof that we're on the right path. You make it all worthwhile. Back at the office, Martin reflected on the impact his new ideas were having. The organization was no longer just a place that provided immediate aid, but a center for social transformation. The team was more motivated than ever, and new projects were emerging every day. Beatrice, watching everything closely, felt a deep sense of pride seeing how Martin had grown. He was no longer just the young man who had shown compassion for an elderly couple in a restaurant. He had transformed into a leader, someone capable of continuing one's legacy while forging his own path, full of innovation and hope for the future. The success of the organization was evident. The impact of Martin's new initiatives was already being felt in various communities, and he was finally starting to see the fruit of his hard work. The organization had become more than just a charity project. It now provided education, training, and real growth opportunities for many people. But despite all the achievements, there was a shadow from his past that he still hadn't fully confronted. One day, while reviewing reports in his office, Martin's assistant rushed in with a surprised look. Martin, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent. Who is it? He asked, without looking up from the papers. She said her name is Luna, the assistant replied hesitantly. The name made Martin stop immediately. It was as if the past, which he had tried to leave behind, had suddenly found him in an unexpected way. He stood up slowly, processing the information. It had been a long time since he had last seen Luna, since that birthday when their lives took different paths. He knew this moment could happen one day, but he hadn't expected it to be so sudden. Let her in, Martin said, trying to keep calm. A few seconds later, Luna entered the room. She looked different, more mature, but still carried the same presence he remembered. Years had passed, but the weight of their last conversation still lingered in the air. They stared at each other in silence for a moment, as if both were trying to understand what had changed and what remained the same. Luna, Martin said, breaking the silence. "It's been a while." She smiled shyly, but there was tension in her expression. "Yes, it has. I needed to see you." Martin gestured for her to sit. He settled into the chair across from her, still unsure of what to expect. "What brings you here?" Luna sighed, clearly nervous. "I've heard about what you've been doing, the organization, the projects, the impact you're having. First of all, I wanted to congratulate you. But also, I need to be honest. I came because I think I have some things I need to say, things I left unresolved." Martin nodded slowly. "Go ahead." She looked down at her hands for a moment before speaking. "I wasn't fair to you back then, Martin. I didn't understand what you were doing, what you were trying to be. When you helped that couple, I felt ignored, like you were putting others before me. At the time, I could only see things from a selfish perspective. I was so focused on what I wanted, on what I expected from you, that I couldn't see what you were really trying to do." Martin remained silent, listening intently. He knew there were unresolved feelings between them, but he also felt that he had moved so far forward in his personal journey that those past issues now seemed almost irrelevant. "I've heard about you," Luna continued, "how you've changed so many lives, and I realized you were right, Martin. Your compassion, your desire to do good, that's what defines you. And I didn't realize that when it mattered most. I thought I could come here and maybe start over, try to rekindle what we had." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and Martin leaned back, thinking. He looked at Luna, seeing how much she had changed. There was sincerity in her words, a genuine regret. But there was also something he knew he needed to say. "Luna," he began, carefully choosing his words, "I appreciate you coming here and being honest. The truth is, back then, I was also trying to figure myself out. I followed my heart, but it came at a cost for both of us. What happened between us affected me in many ways, and I hold no grudge. But I've changed, and life has taken me in a direction I never expected." He paused, looking at the papers on his desk, representing all the work and effort of the past years. "I'm in a different place now, Luna. What happened shaped us, changed us. And while I respect what we had, I think moving forward is the best choice for both of us." Luna looked at him, clearly moved by his words. She had expected a different response, perhaps a chance to start over. But seeing the calm and conviction in Martin's eyes, she understood that he had grown in a way that didn't allow for going back to the past. "I understand," she said with a sad smile. "You really have changed, Martin, and that's amazing. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I admire everything you've become." Martin smiled gently. "I wish you the best too, Luna. Truly. And I'm grateful for the moments we shared, even if the path was different from what we expected." She nodded, standing from the chair. "Thank you, Martin. I needed to hear that." And with one final look of farewell, Luna left the room, leaving Martin with a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. After Luna's departure, Martin looked out the window of his office, watching the city that had changed so much since he began his journey. There was something liberating about reconnecting with someone from the past and realizing how much he had grown. He felt more at peace, knowing that he had made the right choices for himself and for the organization. A few minutes later, Beatrice walked into the room with a smile. "Everything okay, Martin?" He smiled back. "Yes, everything's fine. I was just reflecting on the journey we've been on." Beatrice sat next to him and looked at him warmly. "You've done so much more than we ever imagined, Martin. One would be so proud to see what you've become." Martin felt a wave of emotion as he thought of one. "I'm just trying to honor what he started, and I think we're on the right path." Beatrice smiled, agreeing. "We are, and you're leading the way brilliantly." Martin knew that new challenges would come, but he was ready. He had faced losses, overcome obstacles, and found a purpose that guided him every day. Now, with the organization growing and impacting even more lives, He knew the future was full of possibilities. And as he looked toward that horizon, he felt a peace he had never experienced before. He was exactly where he needed to be,